Welcome back to Learn MoGraph. I'm a big Walking Dead fan, and I recently saw this cool logo animation for the new series, The Ones Who Live, that's airing on AMC. And I thought it'd be a cool tutorial just to walk through and show you how it's done in regards to how to get the fire effect behind the text and these heat waves that are rippling off of the text as well. So let's dive right in and take a look. We're going to start by creating a new composition. Composition, new composition. And we're just going to call this one The Ones Who Lived, title, animation. And the first thing we need to do is add some text in here. I think we're going to call this The Ones Who Learn. The Ones Who Learn. And we're going to center this up within our composition. And we can adjust this a little bit. Take down our size and adjust our leading. I think that looks pretty good, and we can change the color to something so we can see it a little bit better. Change that to white, and we're going to add a black background. So Command or Control Y on our keyboard, and we're just going to select black and put that at the bottom of our layer stack. So the next thing we need is a fiery background for the background of our text. And as you've seen in some other tutorials, I'm going to use my Pexels video plugin from AE Juice, and I'm just going to search for explosion. And this one here looks pretty close to what they actually used, so I'm going to select that and just click import. Cool, and I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to bring this down below our text, and I'm going to go down here to the bottom left of the After Effects window and click expand or collapse the transfer controls. And that's going to open up our track matte options. And to put the fire behind our text or inside of our text, we're just going to pick whip our fire to our text. And just like that, we have the very base of our The Ones Who Live title animation. Another thing we can do is maybe take this first video here and import that. And we can just also use our text as a track matte for that and change the blending mode to something like add. And drop our opacity to maybe something like 25, just because it adds a little bit more vibrance to the text. We're just going to trim our composition here. If we play that, we have the very beginnings of the text. And if we go back to the original, we can see that that's pretty close to what we have going on here. Their fire is a little bit more detailed, but I think we have a good base to go off of. You can also see that there's these flames that are sitting outside of the text, and that's something that's pretty easy to add on as well. If we just search for flame, we can maybe take something like this and import that into our sequence. And if we change our blending mode to something like screen, that's going to get rid of the black around the edge. And if we solo this layer, you can see that it's inside of some sort of fire pit. So if we add a curves effect, we can bring down our blacks and really just have our fire. But this kind of made it a darker orangey color. So we're also going to add a hue and saturation effect and adjust our hue up a little bit to bring back that orangey color. So if we unsolo that, that gets a little bit closer to what we have in the background. And to add these onto the text, we can just scale it way down and position it around what we have here. And if we bring this down below our other layers, if we zoom in here, shrink that down, press W on our keyboard to bring up our rotation tool. Shrink it down till it fits kind of within the W there. So now we have some fire on the outside of our text. I'm just going to add this a couple more times around the edge of our text. And again, you can get different assets, like you can use this fire here Import that. Again, change our blending mode to screen. Shrink it way down. This has kind of a greenish tinge to the back of it, so we can use our curves again and just really make this dark. Add our hue and saturation to bring back some of the orange. And again, we can just kind of position this around our text in a couple different areas. Now we have fire behind our text. We have some flames along the outside of our text. Next, we're going to add an adjustment layer to this entire thing by pressing Command or Control Y on our keyboard. And we're going to name our adjustment layer Heat. And we're going to create another layer by pressing Command or Control Y on our keyboard. And this is going to be what's going to drive our distortion. So this is going to be called Noise. On our noise layer, we're going to add an effect called fractal noise. And we're going to change fractal type to dynamic progressive, noise type to spline. Going to crank up the contrast, crank up our brightness a little bit, and we're going to reduce our complexity to something like 3. And we're just going to add a keyframe for our evolution. Press U on our keyboard, and we're going to bring that keyframe back to the beginning. And we're just going to give this an evolution of 1 full evolution. And drag this towards the end. And we can move our noise all the way to the bottom of our layer stack. And we're going to click our heat adjustment layer. And we're going to add an effect called Displacement Map. In our displacement map layer, we're going to just select our noise layer, and we're going to choose effects and masks. And right away, it gives us like a really heavy distortion. But if we reduce our distortion to something like 2, and if we use something like luminance for our distortion, what's going to drive our distortion, that makes it a little bit more subtle. Now we have our heat distortion effect. We can go into our noise, and if we wanted to, we can change the scale so we can make it a more fine noise and maybe change the complexity, maybe change our contrast a little bit and our brightness. And if we go back into our heat options, maybe we can change this to something like 3. Just for a little bit more exaggerated effect. Now you can see that before the explosion happens, we see some of our layers. So I'm just going to go in here and tidy up some of our fire layers. And I'm just going to add a small fade in opacity as these come on by about 4 frames. And we're just going to select all of these and pre-compose them. And I'm going to add a quick fade off by about 7 frames. And the original had a slight scale to it, so I'm going to add a scale keyframe, press U on our keyboard, and we're just going to scale it up maybe like 10%, press N, trim our composition. Now you can take this and duplicate it, drop it to the bottom, and we're going to add a fast box blur to get the glowing effect. We're going to crank up our blur radius and our iterations to something like 8. And then we're also going to duplicate our original, bring it to the top, and we're going to use that as a luminance matte. So we're going to take our track matte pick whip, select our top layer, and we're going to click this little icon to change it from an alpha matte to a luma matte. and that will allow just the fire to come through and not the black background of our video to come through. And then if we duplicate our layer again, we can add a solid composite. We're going to change the color to black. And then we're also going to add a fast box blur on that one with a much smaller blur radius, maybe of 75. And change the iterations to something like 12. And that gives us the darker outline around our text. And if we take our bottom layer here, we'll rename that glow. And rename the rest of our layers, shadow, source, matte. If we take our glow, press T on our keyboard, and maybe our opacity is something like 75. Now we can play this. And we have a reasonable approximation of the original, which you can throw any sort of textured background behind. So we can take our black background, we can add fractal noise to it. Again, change that to dynamic progressive, spline. We can reduce the complexity to something like 1. Increase our contrast, reduce our brightness. We can use a tint effect to tint all of our whites. Maybe something in the charcoal color, maybe something charcoal, almost brown looking. And maybe our blacks we just bring up a little bit. Reduce our brightness a little more. And we can add an expression on our evolution. So we have a little movement in the background as well, just like the original did. Although I think they had a custom sort of animation going on there. And we can pre-compose all of our text layers here one more time. Scale that down as needed. And you can see that the glow kind of goes past the edge of our composition here. If we click the continuous roster option, and we also have to go into our layers here and continuously rasterize those. It gets rid of that. Just like that, you can pretty quickly put together this fire inside of text effect seen on AMC's The Ones Who Live.